So hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Gautam Vadkepat. I'm an associate professor of marketing and the director of George Mason University Center for Retail Transformation. And today I'm delighted to welcome all of you to the panel on retail sustainability imperative hosted by the center and sponsored by Microsoft. What we're going to do today is to discuss a wide range of topics, especially what are the critical challenges that retail faces as it tries to improve its sustainability footprint from people who are actually making those changes in retail. And I'm honored and delighted to have four amazing industry experts here who are making changes as we speak. I'm also delighted to introduce my partner in crime who's going to moderate this session, Dr. Mehmet Altug, who is an associate professor here at George Mason University in operations management. Mehmet, maybe you can kick things off by just quickly introducing yourself before we go to the panelists.
Thanks, Gautam. I'm Mehmet Altug, Associate Professor of Operations Management here at the School of Business at George Mason University. I'm also on Faculty Advisory Board for the Retail Center. My research and teaching interests are in pricing analytics, revenue management, supply chain management, and retail operations. And within retail industry, I've been mostly focusing on consumer returns and the new emerging business models, such as renting. I joined George Mason in 2019, and prior to that, I was an assistant professor of decision sciences at George Washington School of Business. And before I started my PhD at Columbia Business School, I worked as a supply chain consultant. And throughout all that, I've been observing sustainability has become more and more critical. So I'm really excited today to be co-hosting this panel with our leading experts and look forward to hearing their valuable experience.
Thank you. Thank you, Mehmet. And just a quick bit of housekeeping. If you have questions, please put it in the chat. But now, without further ado, let's get to our panelists who have graciously made time to share their experiences and expertise with the audience. So we'll go alphabetical, if you don't mind, and we'll, with Adam, if you can kick us off.
Of course. Well, thank you for the invitation, and I'm excited for this session. I am the CEO and one of the two co-founders of a venture startup called Recurate. We enable brands and retailers to create a secondhand market of their products directly on their websites. We're just a few years old, but we've been very fortunate to work with some amazing brands, currently 25 live and another handful that'll be launching soon. Before that, I was at the trade association that represents the largest retailers. It's called the Retail Industry Leaders Association, and I led their sustainability and circularity program.
Well, welcome, Adam. And you might be 2 years old, but you're growing really, really fast from all the news I see around you. So welcome. Julie, next up.
Hi, everybody. I'm Julie Channing. I am a marketing leader, advisor, and consultant with nearly 25 years of experience spanning both agency and client-side opportunities, and have worked on a number of iconic brands throughout that tenure. And I would say I gravitate towards brands who have a real unique and authentic sense of purpose above and beyond the things that they make. Spent about 8 years of my agency tenure at one agency in particular called AKQA, which is known for being a digital innovator, having had the opportunity to work across the likes of Palm Pilot, for those of you who can recall them being the pioneer in the handheld computing space, McDonald's Global, tied to their Olympic sponsorship of the '08 Games in Beijing, as well as the Gap Inc. brands, before making my way over to Levi's, where I led our global digital brand marketing efforts for a few years. And then found my way over at Nest right around the time that Google had acquired them, and was really instrumental in that hypergrowth stage for that company before finding my way over to Allbirds before it even existed. I spent about 5 years, starting about 5 months pre-launch through to the beginning of 2021. So helping truly birth a brand that was rooted in incredible product, but also inherently sustainability at the core of everything that they did. So quite an interesting and diverse set of experiences, but along the way, I have always found a passion around brands that are trying to do good in the world at the same time as being a for-profit business.
Thank you, Malcolm. And I'm an Allbirds big fan, as you well know, probably one of the first few people to buy the sneakers. This is an exciting treat for me myself. Navjit, how about you? Please give us an introduction.
Sure. Thank you, Gautam, for inviting me to this panel. And I'm excited to be here because sustainability is near and dear not only to my personal mission, but even to the mission of my company, Newmine. You know, our core mission at Newmine is to help retailers reduce returns. And our belief is any retailer who is serious about their sustainability agenda, they would see returns reduction as a low-hanging fruit. You know, we are a technology SaaS play. We're really a data insights play. And, you know, since we know nobody truly owns returns in the retailer or brands ecosystem, we actually called our software solution Chief Returns Officer. And we're working with several global retailers right now in helping them with the mission of not only reducing, preventing returns, but in fact, assisting them in their sustainability agenda. And, you know, data has proven at least 70% of the returns can be controlled by the retailer, but only if they can get to the root cause of it. And in fact, those of you in the audience haven't heard, as of this last weekend, Amazon announced on CNBC that preventing returns is going to be a big part of their go forward mission. Yeah. So again, Gautam, thanks for having me here, and happy to provide any insights, experiences that I can bring and share with this audience.
And I'll bring a personal point of view, is that preventing returns also helps save time, because I spend a lot of time going to the store returning stuff, I feel like. So there is also that the convenience aspect of things. Paula, to introduce yourself, please, to the audience.
Sounds great. Hi, everybody. Paula Beckel. I am a director for Microsoft, responsible in supporting our retail and consumer goods customers. I've been with Microsoft the last 2.5 years, and my primary role is to work with retailers and consumer goods to really help them accelerate their digital transformation. And prior to joining Microsoft, I spent 20 plus years in the retail industry, working for retailers like Target. I spent 10 years there, along with department stores for those from the Midwest, Dayton, Hudson, Marshall Fields, and Macy's. So in those roles, I primarily led teams responsible for merchandising, e-commerce, and marketing. And the conversations of sustainability were always really important, even when I go back decades into my career. And it's fascinating to see how much it has evolved. And it's exciting to be part of this conversation because it is something that is very important to Microsoft. We've been very transparent and open about our sustainability goals. And most importantly, how do we help retailers to really achieve theirs? So that's why I'm excited to be here today and to learn from this amazing panel group and just share some of the perspectives that we have.
Yeah, and I'm excited because it's actually, we have a holistic viewpoint. We have solution providers, we have retailers, we have a consumer angle, a supply chain angle. So without further ado, let's get started. What we at the center kind of do always is to try and set the stage by trying to define what the problem is. And as we look at sustainability, like there are so many different definition perspectives on what sustainability is. So let's just quickly go around the room to kind of get a perspective of what you think is, what you mean when we talk about sustainability from your company perspective, from your own individual perspective. And let's just level set to get the ball rolling. And we'll go again alphabetically, maybe. This time, Adam, again, kick things off.
It's a hefty question to answer. What is sustainability? I tend to go back to first principles, thinking about natural systems, and if natural systems can survive in perpetuity, then that's sustainable. Everything that we do on planet Earth is impacting those natural systems. Of course, production and consumption is an element of that. Burning of fossil fuels, mining, etc. They're all components of our global impact. And so, specifically with regard to consumption, the less you can take from the earth and the more you can reuse, the better. So I tend to think about, with regard to retail and consumer products, what sustainability means is keeping items in circulation for as long as possible and then returning them back to the natural system when we're done with them.
That's why you started Recurate, it sounds like, to keep them in cycle for a long. Julie, what's your perspectives?
Yeah, it's hard to follow Adam's lead on that one because I think that there are going to be a lot of common themes across all of us. And what I think you did such a great job of, Gautam, was bringing together a group who's really hitting it from various angles. And I think that that suggests sustainability can be a lot of different things in terms of solutions available to try and help address the inherent problem. But at the end of the day, I think the universal problem is creating a world where people can still be consumers of goods and services, but do it with a clean conscience, knowing that they are not doing more harm than good in the process of consuming and experiencing life as we know it. And so the way that we can all kind of contribute to solving that problem by virtue of either making products that have less impact on the planet to begin with, or finding means to extend the life cycle of said products. All of those, even things like regenerative agriculture and different energy sources, they are all part of the solution, and the inherent problem is just leaving the planet in better shape than we found it at the end of the day.
And I love the point of clean consciousness. I wrote that down now. Navjit, your perspective on what sustainability is.
Well, Julie and Adam have already provided a broad perspective there, right? And the way I look at it is, hey, retail is about bringing a product that can be consumed by a consumer. And you know what? In doing all of that, what is the minimal impact we can make to the environment, whether it is to the trees, the water, the fuel, the humans, or the animals? It's as simple as that.
Excellent. Paula, do you have anything to add to share your perspective on what sustainability is?
Oh my God, it's tough to follow this whole crew adding on. So I'm going to put it, I'll add a little bit and apologize for duplicating some of the messaging, but I think we're all pretty passionate about this. When we talk about sustainability for retailers, we're thinking about meaning like, what's the impact? What are the impact of the actions as that retailer as a whole? And that means everything from, and Adam and Julie and Navjit, you already touched on this, the impact of how much plastic, water, anything that we are wasting that has a negative impact on our world. And so that's sort of the responsibility that we want the retailers to look at holistically. Sustainability years and the early starts of this from my merchandising perspective was always a lot about like, what's in the product? What are we doing? But it's continued to expand in scope for definition for retailers and trying to understand what all those actions are about. And so the only thing I'll add to everything that everyone's already said is that in defining sustainability, there's also an importance around visibility, transparency, and honesty in your sustainability actions. And so I just want to throw that out as a teaser for some of the, I think, our conversations coming up, because having that understanding, I think, is really important to not only defining sustainability, but how you as a retailer act in a responsibly sustainable way.
Yeah, and I love that teaser, right? And that is critical. And I think it's the crux to solving some of the sustainability challenges that we are facing. And as a sustainability researcher myself, I'll say, right, there is also the societal and the social aspect, taking care of the people as well. That is an important, just as important as taking care of the environment and the governance mechanism, that Paula, that you talked about. But Mehmet, would you like to post the next question?
Yes, exactly. Thanks, Gautam. Sustainability and in general, environmental and social corporate governance is kind of on every retailer's mind. And what explains its growing popularity? What are your perspectives? And we can maybe go around in reverse order this time, Paula.
Oh, look at that. See, you threw that out there and you slipped it back to me. So that'll teach me. Okay, so kind of what is rephrase the question, the meteoric rise. So when we think about this and when we talk about this within Microsoft and with our retail customers that we're working with, sustainability is really growing priority in retail and consumer goods, packaged goods. Industry leaders, employees, investors, and on the consumers who buy the goods, they care about sustainability. So we know like 50% of consumers globally are choosing to buy from products, from brands that have a clear commitment to sustainability. So that has continued to drive the rise in what I call the conversation within retailers. Now, many customers are happy to invest in sustainable retailers, but going green is about really that broader picture. And in some people's minds, it was about, is that retailer doing things around the product assortment, or are they acting in sustainable ways around their energy and consumption? What we really want to think about when we talk about this from a Rise perspective is that what matters to the consumer, and we're all consumers. We're bringing a point of view forward from our retail backgrounds, but we're all consumers. And so that helps us understand the mindset of the consumer and understanding the why. And so I think that has become a very important thing for the retailers to listen to. And that also has kind of driven that conversation.
Definitely, exactly. I mean, as consumers, we demand that, right, from customers, from retailers. Thanks. Navjit?
Well, it's interesting, we are consumers as well, right? And we all have been spoiled by the big player that I won't name again, fast, free, easy shipping, and then came fast, free, easy returns. So if I put my hat off, returns, because that's where I'm coming from, the expectations have been set of fast, free, easy returns as well. Now, what has happened over the last couple of years is, especially as e-commerce has grown through the roof, I don't know if everybody's followed the stats. Even though e-com went through the roof, returns grew up to about 60% in the last 2 years. Think of it that way, right? The volume of return. And the reason I bring up the volume is, hey, if everybody is focused on addressing that volume, hey, how do I handle it? How do I recycle it? How do I refurbish? How do I resell, etc.? Hey, I think there's that low-hanging fruit, guys. We need to change our thinking. When I say we, meaning across the ecosystem, there are ways to prevent returns, because you know what? Ultimately, that helps our planet as well.
Prevention is the best cure, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah, as consumers, we love needing flexible returns, definitely, but on the other hand, it has serious implications on sustainability.
Well, Mehmet, just another point, right? Another reason I believe there has been a big rise is because it's our next generation who is a lot more savvy about sustainability, at least more savvier than I was when I was their age, right? So think of it, that's the next generation of consumers who are actually going to be demanding it from the retailers.
Thank you. Julie.
Yeah, first off, I'm just so glad that it's a part of the conversation across every company nowadays, because when I started working on brands that had this more at the center of their overarching reason for being, it was Nest probably, I was there in 2014, 2015, and it was a luxury to care. It was seen as, that's a problem that only people who have a certain amount of disposable income to pay up for products that are made more sustainably can be a part of the solution for. And, certainly, again, when we launched Allbirds in the late part of 2015, where that was the core focus of the business, people weren't buying products because they were made more sustainably. They just wanted great product. And at the same time, they were starting to expect more from the businesses that they were purchasing from, in terms of them having a really clear set of values that were behind the business in the first place. And so it's been amazing for me to see that change over the course of the last 8 or so years. And I love that it's now on the agenda for every single company. I think that the BlackRock CEO a couple of years ago making an announcement that they were only going to be investing in companies who had a really clear ESG commitment is definitely a driving force in terms of, the investment community and shareholders now starting to value that, maybe not on equal footing with, but more and more in terms of one of the key priorities of what business success looks like. I think the other important thing, you guys have touched on the fact that consumers are now demanding it. This younger generation of consumers in particular really hold the brands that they buy from to a higher standard in terms of what is that commitment to and contribution to a better society in some way, shape, or form. But the other thing is, I think as an employee, as an employer, employees are now demanding that they work for companies who have a really clear set of values that they can get behind, and that they are trying to balance those profits and principles in a meaningful way. And so, you know, I just think that it is the way forward. There isn't one simple solution, as we've already talked about, but I do believe that more and more companies are going to, it's going to be a requirement to be deemed, you know, a successful business, to figure out how to keep the profitability and the principles in balance with one another.
Thank you. It's definitely a primary problem now, primary message, and not secondary anymore. Thank you. Adam.
I might have more of a moderated view relative to the other panelists. Because while I definitely believe that sustainability has become a higher priority in the industry, I do think there's a very long way to go. And maybe how I think about it is like the hype cycle, where sustainability is in a bit of a hype cycle. Everyone talks about it, and you see reports on it and how many consumers care about it. But then at the end of the day, it's not always reflected in their purchasing habits. And you know, you see fast fashion and ultra fast fashion growing enormously just in the last 5 years or so as kind of an indication of the alternative. But also part of that hype cycle, if you peel the onion back a couple of layers, is that there is a slow and consistent trend towards more sustainable practices and more sustainable business models. I think that's going to take a long time, but we are butting up against global limits that will require us to be sustainable in one form or another, and already are. So that's driving that underlying trend towards more sustainability. One of the things that I think is especially interesting is that historically, there was really only one way to consume. It was to go into a store or maybe online and buy something new. But now there's so many consumption models out there that people can choose, and certain consumption models are inherently more sustainable than others. One of which, you know, of course, I care really deeply about resale, because if you can keep an item in circulation longer, then it has the potential to significantly reduce the life cycle impact of that product. So, you know, now more than ever, consumers have real alternatives beyond just material, the change of materials or production processes or shipping. There's real consumption alternatives.
Hey, Adam, you brought up a great point, and if I may interject, right? So what I found, again, this is beyond retail as well, right? So companies like Google, so I was searching on a flight, and now Google Flight gives you an option which says, hey, if you fly this particular flight, it gives you an indicator of their carbon emission compared to what a normal would be. So now they are influencing consumer behavior, and they're taking into factors like, hey, are you in the business class or economy, and are you going a direct route, etc. So the point is, you know, it's not just in retail. I think it's going to be happening across the board.
Yeah, and I was going to say, Navjit, Google Maps does it, right? Now it gives you routes that are. So, and Adam, thank you for setting up the next section of the conversation, which is that, yeah, everyone, it's on the forefront, right? We've heard consumers want it. We have heard companies trying to do it. We've got stakeholders trying to pressurize companies to engage in more sustainable behavior. But as you rightly set it up, there are challenges to actually enabling a sustainable retail ecosystem. And so let's dive into really that part. What are the challenges and what are the solutions to some of these? And, you know, Julie, you said there's not one solution. So let's maybe talk about some of the solutions, and let's start off with the basics of it, right? So if we think about it, product is perhaps the most critical aspect when it comes to enabling a sustain, and we can debate that later. But product is an important aspect to enabling a sustainable retail ecosystem. So what are the challenges? You worked at Allbirds, where the actual raw material itself was a critical component. What are the challenges to design a product for being sustainable? And what are the solutions that are out there?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I agree wholeheartedly with Adam about the fact that, like, wouldn't it be great if products had a lifespan such that they could stay in circulation longer and longer? And that would be a significant way to reduce impact. But when we're talking about new product, I think people really need to understand the impact of the material choices that they make first and foremost. And the sad truth is that a vast majority of the things that we consume come from petroleum, which is essentially dirty old oil. And in the case of Allbirds, again, I flash back to when we were prepping for launch, and admittedly, people thought that we were crazy, that it was such a crazy concept to make a shoe out of wool, that thought that it could compete with the likes of the greats like the Nikes and Adidases of the world. And the reality was that we believed wholeheartedly, if we didn't start at the very top of the product design process and rethink the material choices themselves, it was going to be really hard to have the kind of impact that we wanted to make. And you've got all of these incredible natural materials around you. Allbirds went on from wool to eucalyptus tree fiber, and even the product material or the component that eluded us for a very long time was the shoe sole. Shoe soles are typically made of EVA, which again is petroleum based, and it's made that way because it is the most durable solution out there. And who wants to buy a pair of shoes that don't have a sole that's going to protect their foot, right? And so I think this is a good example of where, if you're really committed to being a force for change, you also have to think really outside the box and sometimes reinvent the materials themselves. And so in the case of the shoe sole, we knew that that was an area of real opportunity, and that we weren't going to just stick with the available options. We were going to figure out how could we challenge the industry to change its ways. And we actually ended up partnering with a company based in Brazil called Braskem that helped us create the first ever green EVA solution made out of sugarcane. And, I think one of the important things to remember when we're in this sort of fight around sustainability and helping resolve the climate change crisis, it's a collective goal, right? This is where competition needs to be defined differently. And in this case, we saw an opportunity not only to create a more environmentally friendly solution, but Allbirds is still, a very small brand in the ecosystem of the footwear space. So what we did was actually open source that ingredient and make it available for anybody who wanted to take advantage of that as an alternative to traditional EVA options. And in doing so, we were helping push the entire industry forward, as well as finding a solution that made for better product and continued to put Allbirds at the forefront of material innovation and really like a revolution in sustainable manufacturing. And so, I just think that's a concrete example that shows when you have the commitment, you're willing to look at new solutions, and they're not easy and they take a lot of time. But if we as an industry collectively see this as a problem that we need to solve together, I think that you'll get a lot more creative in how you solve it and how those things get adopted more broadly.
Yeah, and I love the point of collaboration, right? Like it is an us problem. Let's just go around and give anyone else who wants to add to the product part, like what are the challenges to actually enabling products to be more sustainable?
I'm excited to jump in here. So Adam and Navjit, are you okay if I?
Absolutely, go for it.
Okay. I love the full end-to-end spectrum, Julie, that you just gave around all of the decisions and how you guys really sought out that sustainable solution around the product, and the consumer voted by buying in that piece. So thinking back through my time in merchandising, so in a lot of the questions and things that you're talking about, there were other things that we could lean in on in order to capitalize on making the right decision to be sustainable around the products that go above and beyond even what's in it, from packaging to disposal of the overall packaging, that then you can make real decisions in that product design around that can help bring forward the right sustainability results that you desired. And then it bleeds into, how is the product shipped? How is it actually opened and returned? I mean, there's so many additional layers when you talk about product that can do all of those right decisions, because and I'll call this out for the retailers on the call. There's a healthy tension is the choice of words they'll use, but there's a real tension between what are those decisions costing you from the overall composition of the product, as well as then what can you afford? What can the consumer afford? I think a comment was made earlier on the call around, it used to be a viewpoint that to make that purchasing decision around a sustainability product, it was always at a premium. And the consumers today want to purchase a sustainable product, but not necessarily at a full trade-off on costs. So those are a couple of other areas that need to be considered in the scope of that, in ways you can help affect that product and bringing forward a really sustainable item and still managing internal costs so that the consumer isn't always paying a premium.
I love that perspective of actually like, hey, there are these peripheral stuff, not peripheral, I guess, that you need to have that holistic viewpoint on the whole journey to the customer and back from the customer to the retailer or manufacturer. Adam, Navjit, do you guys have any additional thoughts on this? There's one question pertinent to this topic in the chat as well that I want to cover.
Well, Gautam, I think another key thing that Julie brought up and you also hit is around the collaboration, right? And in fact, just yesterday, I had conversation with two big brand name apparel retailers, and they both are competitors. But you know what, with respect to sustainability, they are willing to collaborate. They're willing to learn from each other. Because you know what, customers buying from those brands because of the product they make. They're not buying from them because of the other sustainable practices. So there's a lot that, you know, the whole environment, the whole ecosystem, there's a value in collaborating across.
Adam, any additional points or?
No, nothing else to add. This was
okay.
Great.
So just a quick question that came up in the Q&A was that from Kyle, which was the question that this demand for more sustainable materials, are we putting a massive strain and we won't be able to supply them? And I've spoken with several startups in the material space, right? The demand is there. Are they able to scale fast and get that product? Any thoughts around this particular question?
Yeah, I could share a perspective. Again, just kind of referring back to my Allbirds experience and some of the things that were top of mind in regards to sourcing wool, for instance, which was the predominant material being used. And, you know, of course, we had these relationships in place with the farmers that gave us a longer lead time in terms of the material commitments that we were making. But really, again, at the end of the day, it was how do we even help the farmers shift their practices to regenerative agriculture? You know, it's a longer runway for sure, but it is the long-term solution as well. How do you actually inherently shift the way that the land is being taken care of, that it's actually sequestering more carbon than it's emitting, and some of these things that again are pretty giant problems that are a real step change in the solutions to sustainability. And going back to the comment around collaboration, also require more than one buyer, being Allbirds, to impact change. So there was a coalition of brands who en masse, you know, could commit to the volume of materials that they would be buying, that it made sense for the farmers to start making the investment that was required on their part to shift over the way that their farmland was being managed. And so that's just, again, one simple, but I think really pertinent example around how does this become a solution that has longevity. It's about completely rethinking the systems themselves and starting to take small steps towards that, that overarching change that we need to have in place.
I was just gonna, I was just gonna add to that piece too. And this is the beauty of, as the conversation about sustainability continues to amplify, so can the innovations.
Yes.
So in thinking about those pressure points, what are the technology enablers that can help and inform and create innovation in production, like the example Julie was giving? And so I think it is definitely something that we need to think about holistically, because that is going to help solve for that. Because you're right, there will be new pressure points put on as demand for sustainable products is there, but that also is going to lead to greater innovation in how we manufacture, how we deliver, how we display products, how the consumer consumes the product. So I just want to make sure we think about that perspective too, because I think it will help drive innovation that will help offset some of that pressure that will be a real result of it.
All right, so we could get stuck on just the product part of things for an hour. So in the interest of moving forward, you know, it's not that you build it and everyone will come, right? And this, Adam, you kind of talked about this point that yeah, consumers actually might claim that they want sustainable products, but there is what we academics call a behavior intent gap, right? And there was a question on the chat exactly on this point. How are brands going to help change this? So can you just talk about, broadly speaking, what are the challenges that come from actually getting consumers to adopt, like to actually put the money where the mouth is, so to speak, and how can retailers and members of the retail ecosystem try to nudge consumers in the right direction?
I actually think Julie touched on part of this earlier, if I remember the comment correctly. The way I tend to think about it is that retailers and brands should create what I've heard called eco-superior products, which are products that are more environmentally friendly, but also better in every other way. They're more affordable, they're nicer, you know, more comfortable, more convenient to consume. Basically, what I'm implying is that there's a number of dimensions by which consumers look to purchase. It's not just that every customer is making a decision based on the sustainability attributes of a product. Some customers are looking for convenience or affordability, others are looking for uniqueness. And so I think we have to remember that there's a number of attributes that we have to solve for, and being an eco-superior product is, you know, one term that can help us get a sense for that. In terms of what brands and retailers can do, I think for one, maybe most important is get your own house in order first. I do feel like there's this trend now towards marketing sustainable claims without really having the foundation built underneath it. I know people call that greenwashing, and that's part of that hype cycle, where every brand feels like they need to be a part of the sustainability movement, even if they don't really have much to back that up. And then once they do, I think being just authentic to who they are and authentic to what they're doing and the path they're taking to be more sustainable, because I don't think any of us can expect that every product is going to be 100% sustainable overnight. But if you can build that relationship with customers in such a way where you can really inform them or educate them in a fun and engaging way about what your roadmap is to be more sustainable, I think that's really what brands and retailers can do at this point.
Yeah. And that's an excellent point about education, right? There's some academic studies which actually say that when you use the word clean, they think, or green rather, they think it's less effective than some of the other products, which is mostly an education and a perception related issue. Any other thoughts on how we can actually bridge that gap between behavior and intent for a consumer?
Well, Gautam, another one of those things is, you know, hey, how do we educate the consumer on sustainability versus the convenient factor of I need it now, right?
Yes.
You can create the best sustainable product, but if, you know, on the other side, consumer is, hey, I need it tomorrow, but now can retailers deploy certain strategies, incentives to say, hey, if you wait another 3 days, you're going to get it, you're going to still get the same product, but you know what, it has a bigger impact to the other aspects of sustainability.
Yeah. And I'm curious, how do we do that actually? Like, how do we incentivize people to not be so convenience on demand oriented?
Yeah,
Well,
you're starting. Oh, go ahead, Navjit.
No, go ahead, Paula.
You're starting to see, for those of us that you do a lot of shopping online and things, like small incentives. Can I take all of the items that you ordered and are you willing to wait? Which is the tension that Navjit just brought up that says, I want it now, but wait, I just asked you if you made a choice of having all of your items shipped together. That's a more sustainably friendly option. What's the incentive? And in some cases, you know, it might be an additional discount, it might be a promotion, things like that. So I call that out as that's one lever, but that's an additional cost that's put in there. The other one is the education. How are you informing the consumer that the impact of that decision of their immediate, I want it now, might not be the best option from that eco-friendly perspective. So I think there's responsibility across an organization or retailer to think about this from a messaging, from overall processes, and what are the things that they can put into place from a technology standpoint that's going to enable them to help the consumer make an informed decision, to kind of lean into that when you get that tension between I want it now, but it's not necessarily the best decision from an environment standpoint.
Yeah, I would just add, and this is coming at it from a marketer's perspective, right? But I used to tell my team at Allbirds that we were in the business of edutainment. You know, we had a responsibility to educate the consumer about the impact of the things that they were buying and consuming, but do it in a way that felt approachable and easy to understand and had a little bit of levity. And, you know, historically in the industry, things around sustainability were filled with big words and scary numbers and things that really detracted the average consumer from caring or taking the time to learn. And so just philosophically, that was how we approached our marketing communications and building the entire brand narrative at Allbirds. And, you know, I think the other thing that's really important, we've talked about, there's so many different ways to solve for this. There's also not a consistent way for measuring impact, right? Like there's so many different ways in which people are, or brands are holding themselves to some set of standards that they deem as dictating their progress. And one of the things that we did that I was particularly proud of, carbon emissions was a core focus for us. And how do we just simply reduce the carbon impact of the product? And, you know, you got to start with measuring it and then find ways to reduce it and ultimately offset whatever the balance is. But we realized there was no common and simple way for consumers to understand. And so we put a lot of emphasis behind publishing the carbon score of absolutely every single product that we made and actually putting it on the product. And the intention there, again, going back to edutainment, was everybody in the food world has come to accept the idea of calories on food as the great equalizer. And how do we get to a similar place in terms of equalizing the impact of the products that we're buying? And how can everybody ultimately get to a place where a carbon score is that number that makes it really easy for consumers to compare this product versus that and make an informed decision accordingly? So I think that there's a lot of responsibility, and I take it as something that's a real advantage as being a marketer of how can you actually use your talents in storytelling to help make it simpler for people to understand and also to set some standards that brands can collaborate on again to really hold themselves consistently accountable to.
Hey, Gotham, can I add a comment onto what Julie just said? And it was something we were going to touch on later when we talk about kind of from a governance perspective, because I think the comment was already made about like greenwashing and how are things potentially being represented to consumers that may not necessarily be accurate. And then playing off of what Julie said around understanding the data and how is a marketer's responsibility of making it easy to understand. Just wanted to reinforce, like from the perspective that Microsoft brings, we really think about it in our ability to kind of connect the data, both for Microsoft and for our retailers that we work with. And we kind of bucket it in 3 different ways. And it just played nicely, so greatly off of what you just said, Julie, that I just want to jump in. We think about it in terms of being able to record. How do you connect the data so that it accurately represents really the impact that you're making? And then secondly, how do you report it? It's got to be visualized and reporting that environmental impact and sustainability so that it's real time and not looking too far back. And then the third step we talk about is then reduce. How do you take that data and really make sure that you're learning how to advance your efforts to take action on it? And I feel like that gets us into how we can help retailers really create that governance view because they're leveraging the right data. So I just wanted to add that because it's exactly right. And then that's a partnership with marketing and how you communicate it.
Yeah, and I've said this publicly, right? Data is one of the key solutions. How you collect and manage data is one of the key solutions to addressing the sustainability problem. So we're crunching along. Let's move on to the next part of the topic. Mehmet, do you want to kick us off?
Product and consumer side are definitely critical to establish a sustainable footprint. But on the other hand, retailers are at the most downstream of the supply chain. So in order to understand and to better appreciate how to build such a sustainable footprint. Can you elaborate a bit more on the challenges and solutions that are needed on the supply chain side, both in terms of forward and reverse logistics, visibility and traceability? How do you incentivize maybe the supply chain partners? We may get started with Navjit.
Sure. And I'm going to piggyback on what Adam said earlier, right? Retailers first need to understand their own internal operations and supply chain well. And all that comes back to what Paula said is all about the data, right? If you have the data, if you have the mechanisms to measure it, get the insights and act on it, only then you can make progress. So you got to have that baseline first of, hey, where are we and where do we want to go next? And then, in the supply chain, it's not only in the forward supply chain, right? Getting the products from offshore to the shore here and to the DC and to the consumer, and not to mention, hey, that product has to come back to the retailer. So you can see all the impact of various touch points of fuel consumption, packaging, labor, going out and then coming back as well. There are so many touch points that can be optimized, but to get to optimization, you got to understand the data.
The point you made, Navjit, nicely connects to earlier points on product design, right? One can design all these eco-friendly products considering working with the suppliers and even collaborating with the competition in some cases, right?
Yep.
Paula, anything you want to add? Or?
No, I think that was well said. I will leave it at that. I do want to say though, I don't know if we want to touch on this. I just saw a question pop up twice. That was, and maybe it plays off the supply chain. The question about why do sustainable goods cost more? Yeah. So I'm going to put this in perspective of a retailer and my merchandising background. For years, as we were developing product assortments and what products that we were bringing forward that we believed consumers would vote for with their purchasing dollars, my background at Target was always expect more, pay less. It was about bringing the absolute most value to the consumer at a lowest cost. And in some cases, maybe that incented decisions years ago that weren't necessarily the most sustainable. And so as we, as a retail community, have continued to really hear the consumer say we want more sustainable products, we don't have some of the same maturities in how we develop design, some of the things that Julie was talking about in those products. So that might be the perspective of where we're at today. I lean in and hope that innovation is going to help us balance that out. But I just kind of want to share that perspective from a retailer's point of view, that was probably some of the pain points that we are all experiencing as we were seeking to change our product assortments to be more sustainable. We didn't necessarily have some of the same innovations, technology, history, understanding of how we could do that without it always being an incremental cost. So I think it's an absolute fair call out that we've mentioned a couple times through the course of this conversation, is that the belief that sustainability came at a premium. But I feel like that's a responsibility of retail to continue to figure out like how can we create a better balance to that. So I just wanted to touch on that because I'd seen it pop up again. Yeah. And I'll hand it back to you, Mehmet.
Well, Paula, if I may just add to that, right? So even though we are saying, hey, the retailers got to do it, but I think, at the end of the day, it's the consumer who's going to be pushing the retailer, and that pushes innovation even further.
Great, exactly.
So, one additional comment I'd make on the back of that is just, I think as more companies start to make these types of material choices a priority, the costs come down. So for instance, when we were using recycled polyester laces and paying a premium for it, at the end of the day, a consumer didn't know that it was 4 cents more because we were using recycled poly. We just knew that that was the thing that we felt was the right thing to do, given our mission. But guess what? Over time, there was more of a demand for recycled polyester over traditional. And as a byproduct of that, the costs came down because everybody in the industry was trying to use that same solution. And so I think that that's where the supply and demand can actually work in the favor of sustainable alternatives over time. And again, consumers want what they want. They want to do good with purchasing, but inherently they're still kind of selfish, right? It's like, first and foremost, it's got to meet my needs. And if I can meet my needs while simultaneously doing good for the world, like, sign me up. And I think that that's where those material choices and the costs are going to come down as there's just more demand for those types of products without compromise.
Julie, it's interesting. I'll just add to what you just said, right? And I just learned. So one of the brands, and this is a very big brand here in the US, in their poly packaging, which is obviously made of sustainable material, they are actually putting on the package, hey, you can either recycle it here or bring it to our store. So they were using it as a creative way to even drive traffic to the store.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of brands are finding solutions to use their packaging to actually be drivers of action, right? And I think that's really smart. Again, you know, I hate to keep using the floor for all of these Allbirds examples, but there's just so many things that were done with the right intentions and also the right execution. One of which was designing the packaging. You know, you talked to Gotham at the beginning about there's other ways beyond the product itself to make that kind of impact. We were, I think, one of the very first brand, well, the first footwear brand to make a shoebox that was a shoebox and a shipper in one, because the company launched as e-commerce only. And it seemed so wasteful to us to ship a box in a box, knowing that the out shell, you know, the exterior shell is just going to go straight into recycling. And so companies challenging themselves to say, like, okay, this is the problem. What's the solution going to be? And you know what was so amazing about that was a very close second behind the product itself. The packaging was the thing that fueled so much of the word of mouth of Allbirds in the early days, because people just thought it was such a delightful unboxing experience that was incredibly responsible and you know, conscientious at the same time. So you know, I just think that those are the kinds of, like, every opportunity you have to think about using those moments differently to shift consumer behavior. It's going to be this virtuous cycle of then companies feel rewarded for it and they want to do more of it.
Great.
We're pressing against time, so maybe we can move on to the next section or topic, ma'am. Go for it.
Business models, maybe we can talk about that, right? So in terms of, I mean, retailers have started to adopt these business models, right? Buy online, pick up in store, buy online, return to store. I mean, as customers, we love those kinds of conveniences, but some of those models might have created maybe additional challenges in terms of its impact on sustainability. Some of them might have helped, right, are helping, such as maybe resale, renting models in apparel industry that's becoming more popular. What are your thoughts? Maybe Adam, we can start with you.
A new business model doesn't necessarily imply that it's a more sustainable business model. So yeah, there's new business models that might be less sustainable and more business models that might be more sustainable. I think really the devil's in the details, and to Navjit's point earlier about the data, I think it really comes down to doing an analysis and understanding what is and is not more sustainable. Certainly different methods of purchasing and pickup or shipment certainly doesn't imply that they're more sustainable, and in fact they might be the alternative. Of course, I focus in resale because one of the most sustainable ways to shop is to purchase pre-owned products, pre-loved products. Of course, the benefit being that you don't have to produce a new product with virgin materials and resources. Rental has grown significantly over the past decade as well as an alternative consumption model. Still unclear if that's necessarily more sustainable. So maybe another way to say it is that I think sometimes people assume that a circular business model is a more sustainable business model, and I think those are not necessarily always correlated.
Definitely, yeah. Using the same product multiple times sounds good in terms of inventory and product. This two-way logistics issue and also reconditioning cost, right, when the product comes back. Thanks. Anyone else maybe to add?
Paula, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, along with that and learning those things, we're definitely seeing a growth in what we're calling kind of that resale. It's a fast fashion one when you think about Poshmark, ThreadUp, all those things. So you're solving two needs. You're solving the consumer's need to find or get their hands on fashion that they may have are comfortable with the gently used approach, and then you're prolonging the life of that garment. in actual use versus it potentially going to a worse option of landfill, et cetera. The other one is that's coming up is in the home industry. So regarding rental or buying back gently used and putting that back into circulation. So I think you're going to continue to see some innovations on those, but to Adam's point, how those actually relieve or actually take some of the pressure off of what we assume is naturally making it a more sustainable choice is still being built out by these models, but the consumer definitely is leaning in first on the apparel, and now we're starting to see it in the home arena as well with furniture.
Great. Thank you. So in the interest
All
of
right.
time, Gautam.
Maybe we have 5 more minutes. So the questions are fast and furious on both the Q&A part as well as in the chat. I have not been able to keep up. So maybe we'll take a couple of minutes to answer questions and then end on your last thoughts on the future of sustainability. So a couple of questions seem to be around assessment of, what is sustainable and measurement, right? So one of the questions that was asked by James was, hey, do we need to do a life cycle assessment? And how do you need scientists to do these things to figure out? And that's a very pertinent question. How do we really understand and measure the impact of these products? Any thoughts? How do we make it easy for people companies and for consumers to figure it out?
Gautam, I see it as two-way. One is establishing a standard across the board. That's one. Secondly, now once you have a standard established, you got to make sure you're capturing the right data at the right time so it can be applied to make a decision. Because without making a decision, the data, the standards are worthless. That's my opinion.
That's great. And I love standards. And there are so many people who are trying to build these standards, to Paula's point earlier about, data being it. The second stream of questions seem to arise around the supply chain, right? How do we get everyone along for it? And also this trade-off between waste versus ethical sourcing of new materials, right? Which is the better way? And my own personal opinion is there's no better way. You need to do both, right? And I'm just going to pitch the ball to you and see what your thoughts are on how we get the whole supply chain itself to collaborate and dance together. Any thoughts on this space?
There's so much pressure today for any of us who's bought anything recently on supply chain in general. So you're going to continue to see innovation in supply chain in order just to deal or address the disruption that's happening. So I feel like there's momentum happening already within the supply chain transformation. And with that, along with it, the volume of expectations around sustainability are going to naturally help those collide. So I think that, from my perspective, is how that conversation needs to come together, because the pressure on supply chains is about really creating that full end-to-end visibility of the supply chain, figuring out ways to reduce costs. And some of those things are going to naturally lead us into things that become more sustainable in order for them to create better ways of operating. So that's my hope and expectation, is those two will come together, because anybody who has shopped in store or online can continue to see there's a disruption happening around supply chain. So innovation and transformation is an absolute necessity in order for that to kind of right itself.
Yeah, and there's a couple of chat comments about even going further down the supply chain to the farmers and educating them on some of these things. Last question here, because we're out of time, and I want to give you the last thoughts, which I like, is on regulations, and what's the role of political regulation, like social political regulations and regulations in general, in managing and taking us to the next stage of sustainable retail and sustainability in general. Anyone has any thoughts?
And I can chime in here. I think that it's great that is a conversation happening in Washington around, imposing taxes on companies who are emitting more carbon into the atmosphere. And, again, there are companies who are taking that on themselves and sort of self-imposing taxes. But at the end of the day, I don't think companies are going to be as incentivized to make that kind of seismic shift that's required unless there are some financial implications. And, it's sad but true. And I think that that's a step in the right direction of just helping reward those who are doing it right. And as a result of that, incentivizing companies to try and find ways to migrate their businesses in that direction as well.
All right, we are against the time, so I want to give you all the final thought. What do you think is the future of the sustainability challenge that retailers are facing? And we'll just go around the horn again alphabetically. Do you think that we'll get to a stage where economics and the social aspects come together and are drivers? Where do we see sustainability going?
I'll just toot the resale horn again, given that that's my focus now. But I hitched my cart to it for a reason, because I truly do believe in it. When I think about our consumption system today, we just use an exorbitant amount of natural resources to produce product that we ship around the world and purchase every day. And the really amazing thing is that we have perfectly great products already stored underneath our beds and in the back of our closets and in our garages that frankly is going completely unused. And if we can find ways to bring all those items back into circulation and displace some of the production of new items, then that's frankly one of the most sustainable things you can do. And the great thing is that there's been a movement over the past decade for more models and more ways to both sell and purchase pre-owned products that's given customers many more choices for how to do that, which is inherently more responsible, typically more responsible than purchasing new.
Thank you. Julie, your last thoughts?
Yeah, last thoughts, I would say, it starts with making more environmentally friendly product from the start, making it last longer and making it easier for people to repurchase and reuse. And then finally, rewarding consumers and making them feel like they are a part of the solution. And as a byproduct of that, really celebrating the impact that they're having collectively. I think that people want to feel good about the impact that they're having, and the more we can make that a reality for them, the more their behaviors will change, which is inherently going to push the industry forward.
And rewarding suppliers too, to engage in
Absolutely.
these behaviors more and more. Navjit.
Well, if we can get the sustainable products in the hands of the consumers and have them keep the product, I think that's the bottom line, right? Customers want to keep the product. They do want to have an option to return, but you know what? If they keep the product, everybody in that ecosystem is happy, profitable, and sustainable.
Love it.
All
Paula,
right,
bring us
wrapping it up.
home.
First of all, thanks for the opportunity to join this panel. This has been a lot of fun. Short and sweet, embracing sustainability as an opportunity, both as a retailer, as a consumer. At Microsoft, we really believe sustainability is critical for meeting economic, societal, and environmental needs. That's going to be effective today as well as future generations. So at that's my closing.
Well, wonderful. I think the future for sustainability is bright. It's not just greenwashing. People, consumers, suppliers, solution providers, everyone is actually making this a priority and trying to move the ball forward. And it is a collective us issue. And I want to thank you all for making the time to join us to share your perspectives. I learned a lot. I want to thank the audience for participating. I'm sorry that we were not very good moderators in not getting to all the questions, but the questions came too fast and furious. I'm sure the panelists will be willing to take questions if they we'll share the recording on our YouTube channel in a week or so. So stay tuned, and thank you once again. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. Bye now.
Much.
Bye.